Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. The White House announcing dominance over Iranian airspace in the next few hours. That's as it says the Iranian regime is weakening by the day. The U.S. is increasing its attacks on the leftover Iranian regime. More fighter jets and more bombers are arriving in the Middle East today. The latest on the fight against the Iranian regime. More than 17,000 Americans have returned from the Middle East amid ongoing U.S. strikes against Iran. The State Department says it will continue to actively assist any American citizen abroad who wishes to leave the region. U.S. strikes on Iran are a crushing blow to China's oil supply. That's as China buys 80 to 90% of Iran's sanctioned oil. With China already on an economic downturn, how will this impact China's economy? And Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says Trump's global 10% replacement tariff is set to rise to 15% later this week. And the White House saying that U.S. will have complete control over Iranian airspace within the next few hours. That's as it says the Iranian regime's retaliatory strikes are weakening by the day. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu at the White House. Mari, good afternoon.
Hey, Don, good afternoon. Yeah, that's right. And the White House is also saying that the Iranian regime is being, quote, absolutely crushed. Press Secretary Leavitt announcing that at the top of her briefing, while also saying that 47 years of the U.S., quote, enabling and tolerating the terrorist regime are over. Press Secretary Leavitt is also laying out President Trump's 4 objectives for Operation Epic Fury. Take a look.
The president has said repeatedly that the objectives of Operation Epic Fury are the 4 military objectives that I laid out for you previously. To destroy Iran's navy, to destroy their ballistic missile capacity, to ensure their proxies in the region can no longer harm Americans, and to also ensure that they can never obtain a nuclear weapon. As for what comes next for Iran, the president has said, of course, it's a good thing for the United States to want freedom for the Iranian people, and ultimately we hope that freedom rests in their hands.
The White House also going more into the reasoning behind President Trump's decision to strike when he did, saying that negotiations with the Iranian regime, they lied, quote, delayed, and tried to string the U.S. along in order to continue building up their ballistic missile system and other deadly weaponry. Press Secretary Leavitt also is saying that there's been a significant reduction in the strikes since day one, which is a sign that the Iranian regime is weakening by the day. Take a look.
The Iranian rogue regime, their retaliatory strikes against the United States and the threat reduction has reduced significantly. If you look at the Iranian ballistic missile launches, they're down 86% from day one levels. So while the United States military continues to increase its complete dominance over this rogue regime, they are weakening day by day.
Meanwhile, the White House is extending its prayers and condolences to the now 6 U.S. service members killed in the operation. Press Secretary Leavitt today announcing that President Trump will be attending their dignified transfer. Don, back to you.
Okay, Mari, thank you. Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma, and you were just watching the White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt giving a press briefing to reporters, mostly taking questions on Operation Epic Fury. And Karoline said that there was, in fact, imminent threat to the United States, responding to one of the questions there, and also asking the press to cover this whole situation fairly. Also to highlight the successes of the U.S. military and what has done in Israel. Okay, now let's go on to our top story today. The Department of War has identified 4 of the 6 American soldiers who died during Operation Epic Fury. Secretary of War Hegseth addressed U.S. casualties during the press briefing this morning.
Much was made of the volume of missiles Iran was able to shoot in the first few days. And sadly, as we projected, a few got through and killed 6 of our best, who will hopefully arrive home soon. We will avenge them, no doubt.
The Pentagon yesterday announcing the deaths of Army Reserve Captain Cody Cork, Sergeant First Class Noah Tegens, Sergeant First Class Nicole Amor, and Sergeant Declan Cody. In a statement, the department said they were killed Sunday in Kuwait. The incident is under investigation. The United States Army Reserve expressed its condolences to the families. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth saying the U.S. is winning in the war against Iran. He says the U.S. will have complete control over the country's airspace in the coming days. The secretary was speaking to a press briefing this morning along with General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Take a listen.
I stand before you today with one unmistakable message about Operation Epic Fury. America is winning, decisively, devastatingly, and without mercy. And we have only just begun to hunt, dismantle, demoralize, destroy, and defeat their capabilities, just 4 days in. Starting last night and to be completed in a few days, in under a week, the two most powerful air forces in the world will have complete control of Iranian skies, uncontested airspace.
Iran's theater ballistic missile shots fired are down 86% from the first day of fighting, with a 23% decrease just in the last 24 hours. And their one-way attack drone shots are down 73% from the opening days. This progress has allowed CENTCOM to establish localized air superiority across the southern flank of the Iranian coast and penetrate their defenses with overwhelming precision and firepower. We will now begin to expand inland, striking progressively deeper into Iranian territory and creating additional freedom of maneuver for U.S. forces.
Both officials say the U.S. military has enough munitions for ongoing operations against Iran, with Hegseth adding, quote, "Iran cannot outlast us." He says more bombers and fighters will arrive today. Hegseth also saying that a torpedo from a U.S. submarine sank an Iranian ship. He did not reveal the name of the ship, but Sri Lanka announcing today at least 80 people were killed in a submarine strike on an Iranian warship.
Yesterday, in the Indian Ocean, and we'll play it on the screen there, an American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II.
Hegseth also reporting that the military killed the Iranian leader behind an alleged plot to assassinate President Trump. He says that target was not the original focus of the war effort, adding that those responsible were eventually placed on the target list. Hegseth did not name the individual. In 2024, the U.S. Justice Department charged an Iranian man in connection to a plot to assassinate Trump, who was then president-elect.
We've known for a long time that Iran had intentions on trying to kill President Trump and or other U.S. officials. And while that was not the focus of the effort by any stretch of the imagination, in fact, never raised by the president or anybody else, I ensured and others ensured that those who were responsible for that were eventually part of the target list. We eventually had the opportunity to do that from the air.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said the U.S. will start striking progressively deeper into Iranian territory. Joining us now is retired U.S. Marine Colonel Mike Jernigan. He's a visiting fellow in the Allison Center for National Security at the Heritage Foundation. So, Mike, good afternoon. Thank you for being here with us today. I have a soundbite of Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth, this morning, giving an update on Operation Epic Fury.
Starting last night and to be completed in a few days, in under a week, the two most powerful air forces in the world will have complete control of Iranian skies, uncontested airspace.
So, Mike, just for our viewers who may not be completely familiar with this concept, can you explain for us what uncontested airspace means for Operation Epic Fury, the significance, the benefits, and what does this guarantee?
Don, thank you for having me. Uncontested airspace is that there is nobody significant that can threaten the U.S. aircraft, either from other aircraft or from ground-based missile launchers. Think about the crosswalk in any city. When everybody's going in a different direction, there's lots of people. But when we use the crosswalk signs, there's a few people in one direction. And then when all the crosswalk signs are off, there's nobody in the crosswalk. That's essentially what we've done with air superiority and uncontested airspace.
Okay, so Colonel, here's another clip. I want to play this as well of what Hegseth is saying the U.S. will do.
And now, with complete control of the skies, we will be using 500-pound, 1,000-pound, and 2,000-pound GPS and laser-guided precision gravity bombs, of which we have a nearly unlimited stockpile.
So what caught my attention was the use of 2,000-pound bombs on Iran. Now, I'm not claiming to be any sort of expert on this, but maybe just very briefly describe the force of power that the bombs that the U.S. intends to use described by Hegseth.
So 2,000-pound bombs and 500-pound bombs are standard bomb sizes. There's a module on the front that can make it a guided bomb, a smart bomb, if you will. And we use the bigger 2,000 bombs on the more significant targets, larger buildings, larger defensive positions, large rocket launchers. We use the 500-pound bombs on smaller targets.
Okay, so now Hegseth is saying this is not a fair fight. So, I mean, what is Iran up against here with the U.S. and Israel teaming up, their combined power of their military?
Yeah, they're up against, as the Secretary said, two of the best air forces in the world. And what's notable is that they are cooperating. They're doing this together. This is not just the Israelis. This is not just the Americans. But we're doing synchronization of targets and communications. So the Israelis are striking one set of targets and the Americans are striking another, so that we're not putting some of those 2,000-pound bombs on the same target. And so what the Iranians are up against is they're busily irritating everybody in their neighborhood by shooting missiles at them. And people are seeing the Iranians for what they are in the world.
Okay, Colonel, with that being said, how long can Iran sustain this war militarily? Because President Trump has said this operation could just take 4 to 5 weeks.
Yeah. The targets will be continued to be degraded in an order of significance. We've gotten the most dangerous ones that could hit Americans and Israelis from the most distance, and now we're moving closer into different targets. How long this takes is many ways up to the Iranians. When the people decide that they're ready for a new government, from the U.S. and the Israeli end, it will go until they've eliminated all the targets that are on their list to go with the stated objectives of ensuring that the Iranians can never have nuclear missiles again. They don't have the ability to harm their neighbors or anybody else in the world.
And Hegseth said the Iranian Air Force is no more built for 1996. I mean, is the Iranian military technology that outdated?
If you've seen the latest Top Gun movie, there's an unknown country that has an ancient F-14 that they flew, and that's representative of Iran. Their aircraft has been degraded, and it's of older supply on the American side, and then also on the Russian side. The Iranians have kind of isolated themselves from their friends and have none. And when they run out of aircraft, they don't get any more. There is no Walmart for Iranian aircraft.
Okay, just a couple more things I'd like to get your expertise on. So according to the Secretary of War, Iran's ability to launch missiles significantly diminished. I'm just wondering here, is there any way at all for Iran to regenerate missile capacity?
That's one of the objectives, is to make sure that not only do we destroy their launchers and their existing missiles, but we destroy their mechanism to be able to create more missiles.
And NATO air defenses destroyed an Iranian ballistic missile headed into Turkish airspace. You're aware of this? Turkey has the option to invoke NATO's Article 4, right, which could lead to the alliance's Article 5, raising the possibility of an expansion on the conflict. But, Hegseth today brushed off the suggestion. What is your reading then on the situation? And what do you think is behind Iran's apparent targeting of Turkey?
Let me answer the different question first. The title the Article 5, you're correct that the Turkish have to ask for assistance, but it also just it triggers a consultation, and then it's voluntary assistance. So those things have to happen for there to be any other NATO type involvement in the missile to Turkey. And to answer your question, your second question about what do I think about Iranians striking the Turkish? I think the Iranians have been bullies in the world for a long time, and now they're lashing out with everything they have in any direction.
So just finally, do you think Iran actually has a game plan here in this operation?
Not anymore. I think they're on the wrong end of a whack-a-mole game, and their game plan is try to keep their heads down and preserve as much of their military equipment and political power that they can.
Okay, well, Colonel, thank you for speaking with us. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me.
Meanwhile, more than 17,000 Americans have returned from the Middle East amid ongoing U.S. strikes against Iran. The State Department says over 8,500 American citizens arrived in the U.S. yesterday alone.
We're identifying options so that Americans who call and register will be able to move from areas where airspace is closed to where airspace is open, where they can either board a commercial flight or a charter flight. We're actively, every single second, identifying additional options to help the American people who wish to leave the Middle East.
The State Department said more Americans have left the Middle East for other countries in Europe and Asia. Others are still in transit back to the U.S. The department said it had helped close to 6,500 Americans abroad with security guidance and travel assistance. Joining us now is Adam Hardage, Special Operations Combat Veteran and former CIA Operations Officer. And we also have geopolitical strategist Darren Gobb. He's a retired lieutenant colonel who served in the U.S. Army as a Black Hawk helicopter pilot and battalion commander. First of all, good afternoon to you both. Thank you for joining us. Now, today, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth gave us a unique perspective of this war, and I have the clip here. Let's take a listen.
This was never meant to be a fair fight, and it is not a fair fight. We are punching them while they're down, which is exactly how it should be. Thus far, Operation Epic Fury has delivered twice the air power of shock and awe of Iraq in 2003, minus Paul Bremer and the nation building. The campaign has 7 times the intensity of Israel's previous operations against Iran during the 12-day war. 7 times.
So, Adam, twice the power as Iraq compared to Iraq, and then 7 times compared to the 12-day war, and saying this is not a fair fight. Your reactions upon hearing this?
Yeah, well, I mean, what you're hearing is basically a prize fighter kind of discussion. It's very much a departure from what you would see historically from diplomatic circles within the U.S. And I think this president and Secretary Hegseth are trying to send a very clear message to American enemies around the world that the old school is gone, and this is a very different way of doing business, and that they are deadly serious about it. So, I mean, I figure, after what we've seen in Venezuela with Maduro, and then Mexico with El Mencho, and now Iran with the Ayatollahs, I think the world is sitting up and taking notice that this administration means very serious business, and they intend to leverage American capabilities to achieve their desired end state and outcome, no matter what the cost.
So, Colonel, can I go to you now? What are you thinking after hearing the intensity that the U.S. military is bringing upon Iran?
Well, this is how it's supposed to be done. When you're going into combat, you're not supposed to want to engage in a fair fight. You're supposed to want to go in to win, and win overwhelmingly, because that saves your lives ultimately. It ends the battle faster because you overwhelm the enemy to the point where they capitulate a whole lot faster, or if they're not even there to capitulate, of course, then it's already over. You don't go into a fight sitting there hoping that it is somehow equal all the way to the end and that you just pull ahead right at the finish line. It's not how this is supposed to work. So from what I'm seeing and what I'm getting out of people in theater, this is exactly what we want to be able to see. You have to go into a place like Iran and overwhelm them very quickly, because they have so many assets that if you let them, if you try to whittle them away slowly, it'll never work. And so I agree with the method. I think the language is correct.
But Adam, we have to talk about the Americans still in the Middle East who are at risk. The U.S. is facilitating charter flights from a number of countries for citizens. So Secretary of State, state official Dylan Johnston saying that since February 28th, over 17,000 American citizens have returned to the United States from the Middle East. Over 8,500 American citizens returning to the U.S. yesterday alone, and the job is not done yet. So on this, what are the risks that Americans are facing in the Middle East right now, Adam?
Sure. I would say probably the biggest risk is just, a casualty of being there, getting caught in the crossfire type thing. So you see this a lot, and frankly, there's been a lot of disruption to all the embassies across the region. So whether you're talking about Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Jordan, the list kind of goes on, and it's really become a situation where you have kind of multiple non-combatant evacuation operations on a small scale happening across the region. So there's obviously threats to U.S. service members, from remote attacks, especially nowadays. You've got drone warfare is becoming a major, probably the leading factor in battle. Drone warfare is very cheap. It's you kind of democratize lethality to the lowest common bidder, and I think we're seeing a lot of that play out, and I think that will just continue to rise. And I would also like to echo what the colonel said. I completely agree with him. If you're going to go into war, then it should be decisive, and it needs to be brutal. It needs to be swift. It should not be something where we get into these endless wars where we don't have any real clear objectives or desire to actually win. So I completely echo his sentiments.
Right, and the administration is saying that this operation is ahead of schedule a number of times now. So, Colonel Gobb, a similar question to you on this topic. Some are asking whether the administration did enough to get Americans out of the region before this operation. So, just your overall comments here. What is the usual protocol, and was it followed?
Well, I would say that the protocol largely looks like it has been followed to the best extent they can without risking operational security. Because let's just say you were to put out a warning that said, evacuate every embassy and everything by this time on this day. Well, that becomes something that gets picked up on very quickly, and can be something that actually puts operations at risks. So, and also, by the way, Iran has expanded what they're doing beyond what some probably anticipated, and their willingness to launch missiles against targets all over the Middle East, out to Turkey, and potentially even going directly east towards, say a Pakistan or Afghanistan for their own reasons. And so you're dealing with an Iran that seems to be on its death rattle, and it's just lashing out at everybody, making more enemies. I think they're doing this right. Ultimately, there's always risk. There's no perfect way to do this, but they've made the assets available. They've advertised the phone numbers and made the systems there. And I can promise you, having used it, the system works. When you put your information in with the Secretary of State's office and say, I need help here, here's my contact, that works. I think you're going to see this play out relatively well, considering what I'm seeing now.
So, Adam, in addition to American citizens, there's also service members who are being impacted right now. Here's Hegseth earlier today talking about this.
Much was made of the volume of missiles Iran was able to shoot in the first few days. And sadly, as we projected, a few got through and killed 6 of our best, who will hopefully arrive home soon. We will avenge them, no doubt.
Adam, President Trump said a couple days ago casualties could rise. Your thoughts on this situation?
Yeah, it's the profession of arms, and that very well in times of conflict, bullets go both ways. Is the old adage, and I would say that for the people that are concerned about troops in harm's way, obviously we don't want Americans getting hurt, but at the same time, in order to achieve these objectives, there's a reason why the men and women put on the uniform, and when called to duty, they will go fulfill that duty. As a veteran of 4 wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, West Africa, and Jordan, Syria, it's something that you do, and you certainly say your prayers and you get your mind right with yourself, your mission, and with God, and then leave it up to the universe and go carry out your duties to the best of your ability.
And Colonel Gobb, anything you'd like to add to that?
Now, Adam's right. Ultimately, you put on the uniform, you raise your hand, you accept the risk. You know what could happen. You certainly pray that it doesn't. But I would remind people, too, that this is going to play especially hard in the state of Iowa, where they already lost members of their state in the attacks in Syria. And it sounds like Adam and I have gone over many of the same pieces of terrain. We know the risks in the Middle East in general and in combat specifically. So pray for the best, but do your duty and stay focused on that.
So Adam, to your previous comment, I'd like to follow up on that because some U.S. lawmakers are calling this a war of choice by Trump. How do you respond to arguments that the U.S. shouldn't start conflicts such as this because it puts U.S. service members in danger?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the nature of the business. If you're going to go into the business of arms, then you have to be prepared to potentially, pay the ultimate price for it. I'm not dismissing any concerns that people have. And certainly being concerned and taking the best care that we can of our service members is this administration's priority and everything else. But to say that, it's just a war of convenience or something that didn't need to be done is a little bit irresponsible, I would say. I think, the president's been very clear about his objectives. I think he's also a brilliant tactician and strategist in the sense that he won't commit, to these endless wars, and he won't put boots on the ground that don't need to be there or aren't going to be able to achieve a clear national objective. And so, I support what the administration is doing. I hear a lot of people say, we're just doing Israel's bidding or whatnot, and I don't see that to be the case. In this case, I do believe, obviously, that we need to support our allies in the region and across the world. But at the end of the day, when Iran has been negotiated with for 47 years and it hasn't worked. And so at some point, you have to take action. You telegraph that and let the world know that it was going to happen if they didn't come to the table. And they didn't. And now here we are.
So, Colonel, talk to us a bit more about the cost of lives here. What in your view, is the right balance in minimizing casualties and also achieving the mission objectives?
Well, that's a difficult one to answer because what you're trying to do is go in there with the expectation that you'd like to leave with no casualties whatsoever, but they're going to happen. So there's no numerical ratio you can put on something like this. You have to lay out your objectives and then you build a plan around the best possible scenario you can to maximize the chances of your people's survival. And that goes back to overwhelming force again. And that by doing that, you put your people in much less risk. And to that question again about is this a war of choice? I would tell you, the number already came up that Adam mentioned. Iran's been at war with us for 47 years. We just have forgotten that we were supposed to be really kind of fighting back instead of constantly taking the punches. We're punching back now, and casualties are to be expected. We certainly don't want any, but I guarantee you the fact that we're talking about no boots on the ground is indicative of the fact that we're not going to go in there with Army and Marine Corps units on the ground to try to do something in Iran. That right there reduces any chances reduces greatly the chance of casualties of any kind. And I think that's where it needs to stop is, we do not need to go into the ground in this country at all.
So Adam, respond to this. Some U.S. lawmakers are depicting service members as victims here, being put in harm's way against their will.
I would just say, that's just political theater, and frankly, it's also disrespectful. American servicemen and women sign up. They sign their name on the bottom line, and they understand that is an oath that is in blood potentially. That's why war is a young man or a young woman's game. And, because the older we get, the more we realize maybe we want to stick around for a little while longer once we have kids and stuff. But the courage that are exhibited by Americans' armed forces are just frankly inspiring and awesome to see. And, I give kudos to the boys and girls that are out there today doing it. And I understand that, harm may come to you, but that's the risk we take. And so, you do the best you can. You reduce risk to mission, risk to force. You come up with the best plan you can. And then when it comes down to it, you got to execute. So the best thing that we could ask for, our lawmakers is for lawmakers to show a little gumption and support for the troops that are actually over there in harm's way doing their duty.
So, Colonel Gobb, I started with Adam, so I want to end with you. How do we honor those who risk their lives in wars such as this? You know, Hegseth today talked about avenging them, but in your view, how do we best honor these fallen U.S. service members?
Well, leave the vengeance mission to the military. We'll take care of our own. I promise you that. For everybody else out there who thinks they never know what to do or if they can do enough for the sake of what the military has done for this nation and for people around the world, I would tell you just to live an honorable, peaceful life that makes that sacrifice worth it. Be a husband or a father or a parent of any kind, mom, whatever that is, raise your kids well, be a good spouse, or be a good child, whatever that is. If you lead an honorable life, you will have made their sacrifice worthy and that's all it takes.
Okay, terrific comments from both of you. Colonel Gobb, Adam, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
President Trump is holding a roundtable at the White House on ratepayer protection pledge. Let's take a look at that.
Deal, one of the worst deals ever made, the Obama nuclear deal. I call it the Obama nuclear deal, where he gave everything to Iran, including a nuclear weapon. It was a road to a nuclear weapon. Bad things would have happened 4 years ago, because they would have had a weapon 4 years ago if I didn't terminate that deal. So we're in a very strong position now, and their leadership is just rapidly going. Everybody that seems to want to be a leader, they end up dead. And it's an amazing thing that's taking place before your eyes, because for 47 years we were pushed around, and we shouldn't have been. And I think I can say, and you see it as well as I do, you see the tremendous progress that's being made. Their missiles are being wiped out rapidly. Their launchers are being wiped out. They're attacking their neighbors. They're attacking their, in some cases, allies, or not so long ago allies. And, it's really a nation that was out of control, and they would have used it on us if we let them, if we waited any longer. A big factor was Soleimani, the killing of Soleimani in my first term. And maybe the biggest factor was the rebuilding of the military in my first term. And then the B-2s hit and I use the word obliterate because it was a complete obliteration of their nuclear potential. And that set them back very, very seriously. If we didn't hit within 2 weeks, they would have had a nuclear weapon. If we didn't do the B-2 attack a number of months ago, they would have a nuclear weapon. And when crazy people have nuclear weapons, bad things happen. So we're in very good shape now. I want to let you know that, and we will continue forward. But it's a great display of military strength, and I'm very proud to have, with some of the people in the room, both senators and congressmen, we rebuilt, and women, we rebuilt our military during the first term, and we're using it a little bit more than I thought we would have to. Venezuela worked out really great. We have a wonderful relationship with the president and the various representatives, and we're taking out hundreds of millions of barrels of oil, and that goes to our benefit and to Venezuela's benefit. They'll be doing better than they've ever done before, and we will get a big piece of that, and we'll also make life wonderful for the people of Venezuela who have been very, very badly hit. So that's a lot said in a short period of time, but you can witness it for yourself. And now we'll get on to something that I'm very proud of, because it was sort of my idea, like
Very much so.
Build your own power plant.
Okay, we're moving on now. U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran may be striking at the heart of the Chinese Communist Party's power. It's a move that's choking off Beijing's vital oil lifeline. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more details.
President Trump's latest offensive against Iran is delivering a massive economic hit to America's top adversary, the Chinese Communist Party.
President Trump is going after the Chinese, and he's not doing it directly, but he is doing it indirectly, and he's cutting off their sources of support.
Over 2 months, the administration's toppled leaders in Iran and Venezuela, both key oil suppliers to Beijing. Now this move could force Beijing to scramble for pricier alternatives.
90% of Iran's exported oil goes to China. The bigger target is actually communist China, which is increasingly in a box, is going to have to start buying its oil, the huge percentage of its oil, on the open market at full price.
Last year, a staggering 17% of China's crude oil imports came from these sanctioned regimes, with Iran alone shipping 520 million barrels to the CCP. As tensions escalate, ships are dodging the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for half of China's oil imports from the Gulf. Such a move could even impact China's ambitions, like taking over Taiwan.
40% of China's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz. That's why when the Iranians were saying they were going to shut it, the Chinese were saying, no, we want it to be open. So he now has massive leverage over China. A move on Taiwan would be disastrous for Beijing.
Many experts warn that the CCP's support for Iran's terror regime is backfiring.
And I hope that President Trump remembers that the Chinese supplied advanced weapons to Iran. And if those weapons were used to kill Americans, we've lost 6 service members already, then I don't think President Trump should be going to China.
But with the upcoming meeting in April between President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping, this oil squeeze exposes the CCP's vulnerabilities. The pressure on Beijing mounts, and many see it as whittling away the regime that threatens freedom worldwide. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The Chinese regime has called for Iran, the U.S., and Israel to stop fighting, citing impacts to global economic growth. Joining us now is Daniel Lacaille, chief economist at Tressis Hedge Fund, international financial analyst, and author of the book Freedom or Equality. Daniel, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us once again. So a Chinese regime foreign ministry spokesperson posted on X today saying the Strait of Hormuz is an important international trade route, and keeping the region stable benefits the international community. So I understand, Daniel, you wrote an article on your website about this. It's titled, Iran Attack Escalation May Hurt China's Economy More Than Anyone. So on this, can you just talk to us about it? Why does this conflict hurt China more than any other country?
Yes, if we look at the global implications, for example, for the United States, the economic impact is very limited. And as you can see in the stock market, the markets are not reacting to it. And it's also a producer of more than 13.8 million barrels a day. It's the largest oil producer in the world. Now, in the case of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz or the escalation of conflict with Iran, the most impacted negatively is China, because 80% of the traffic going through the Strait of Hormuz goes to China. Furthermore, China is importing almost 80% of everything that the Iranian regime is selling abroad. Therefore, it would not just be an impact of reduction in supply that could certainly hurt the economic activity of some of the Chinese factories, but also, and I think that this is the most important thing, is that China receives those products thanks to the US sanctions and thanks to the agreements with Iran at very, very low prices. And obviously, the alternatives, if there is not a disruption of supply, would be to purchase those goods from crude oil to jet fuel to naphtha, etc., at a significantly higher price. We're talking double, etc. So the entire negative impact of a disruption of supply from Iran would fall on the shoulders of the Chinese economy. And I think that that is why they are so adamant about not being in a position of seeing the Strait of Hormuz being shut down.
So Daniel, as you know, this operation have already dramatically reduced tanker traffic through the strait. So let's talk specifics here. Can you give us some actual examples? What are the immediate and real-world impacts that you can think of on China and its manufacturing economy?
Number one, obviously, is that if the traffic going to China starts to disrupt the supply of jet fuel and the supply of naphtha, that would have immediate impact on the chemical industry and on the airline industry. That is obvious, and the impact obviously is uncertain, but it can be from disruption of supply to having to look for alternatives at a much higher price. China will obviously try to get those products from, for example, Russia. But again, it is a very, very significant premium compared to the price and the conditions that they get from the Iranian regime. The shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz doesn't happen easily. Iran has tried to shut down the strait many, many times, but it's never done it. And what we have seen in the past 2 decades, in which shipping companies and global suppliers have grown accustomed to the idea that at some point there's going to be a threat due to geopolitical risk, is that most of those ships immediately have an opportunity to go through different routes to the west. That's why only 7% of the traffic of the Strait of Hormuz goes to the European Union, and less than 4% goes to the United States. So in essence, what we see is that this conflict is going to generate a very significant impact on the Chinese economy short term, driving higher the price of imports at best, or generating disruption in supply for key industries that are essential right now for their exporting activity.
So Daniel, is there any path for China to completely negate or offset its source of Iranian oil?
Oh, there is. Obviously, China has a strategic partner that is Russia, but it takes time. It takes quite a bit of time. It's not something that happens from one day to another, particularly in an environment like the one that we're living right now, in which there is global uncertainty and vessels have been diverted all over the world, no? So, for example, most of the oil that is stored at sea is stored in the west of the European continent, no? There, and that also part in the eastern coasts. And that is virtually impossible to bring to China and offset the volumes coming from Iran very quickly. The Iranian regime has said that they will allow any vessel with a Chinese flag to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. But that, to be fairly honest, is a bit laughable, because anyone that knows the Strait of Hormuz is a 34-kilometer wide strait in the most narrow side. And more importantly, anyone can suddenly change and put a Chinese flag and move on. No, so it defies all purposes. More importantly is that Iran shutting down the Strait of Hormuz shoots itself in the foot, because they stop receiving the enormous amount of reserves that they receive from exports. 80%, as I said prior, of the volume that goes through the strait is from Iran's own exports.
Yeah, I had to chuckle a little bit as well when you say a ship waving a Chinese flag would be allowed to pass through. Because as you were saying that, we were playing footage of how small the ships are in the waters. You could barely make out anything, let alone a flag on this ship. So the next question I have for you is, what would you say has been the cumulative impact, with the situation in Iran, but as well coupled with Venezuela, right, on China?
Oh, obviously, number one is that Venezuela and Iran were the number one and number two sources of supply of either free or heavily discounted oil. So imagine the profits that Chinese refineries were generating, and the benefit for GDP, obviously much lower imports, and the benefits in terms of getting cheap or literally free, as in the case of Venezuela, oil. All of that is an enormous benefit for the Chinese economy. Right now, it'll have to find alternative suppliers, those alternative suppliers are not going to be given oil for free or heavily discounted as Iran is doing, because they're not in the same difficult situation. And even if they are able to look for alternatives from Russia, it's not easy. Let's remember that Russia right now is not a big driver of the imports of oil from China because of the challenges of transport. No, so all of those elements are going to add to the cost of production, is going to add to working capital, and is certainly going to add to the negative impact on GDP from imports. No, higher imports, lower GDP.
Okay, Daniel, just one final question. The Department of War has said that in the coming days, the operation will increase in intensity, with bombs hitting Iran harder. So I'm wondering here, because China has made the Belt and Road Initiative plans with Iran for many years, right? They have cooperated for at least a decade. So what is the impact on this?
Well, I think that the reason why the Chinese government has decided to move to have complete inaction in this decision of the United States and Israel is double. Number one is that they know that the regime is basically over. So it would make no sense to deploy billions of dollars in trying to defend it. The second is that they expect, as in Venezuela, that they will be able to maintain at least a significant proportion of the claims to property, reserves, or long-term contracts. So I think that it's basically a sort of policy of trying to reduce the negative damages, if that makes any sense. And in the thing, and I think that it's also very important to understand that by now we will start to see, as from now, in fact, if there is a change of regime, we'll start to get a lot of information about how much of those funds that have been provided by China and Russia have been squandered or literally stolen by the regime itself.
Okay, Daniel, great to hear your insight as always. Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.